Picture two identical portfolios. Same tickers, same share count, same $2.7 million invested. One is owned by a man who dies in Florida, the other by a man who dies in New York. His Florida heirs inherit every dollar. His New York heirs lose a chunk of it to a tax his family never even knew existed, a tax with a $7.16 million trigger threshold so few people talk about, most residents don't find out it's coming until it's too late to plan around it. That's not the tax difference you already know about. The 0% versus 10.9% income tax story has been told 100 times on this platform. This video is about the parts of that comparison nobody runs the numbers on, the ones that decide not just what you keep while you're alive, but what actually survives you. Florida charges 0% state income tax. Not low, zero. It's written into the state constitution, has been since 1924, which means no legislature can quietly slip an income tax through later. Wages, capital gains, dividends, none of it gets touched at the state level. New York charges up to 10.9% at the state level. Live in New York City specifically, and the city adds its own tax on top, up to 3.876% more. Stack them together, and someone earning significant income in Manhattan could be facing a combined state and city marginal rate approaching 14.8%. Run that against the Dividend portfolio throwing off $80,000 a year. In Florida, you keep the full $80,000 before federal tax. In New York City, at the top of that bracket, you could be handing over close to $12,000 of it to state and city government every single year for owning the exact same portfolio. That gap is why Citadel moved its headquarters to Miami. It's why Goldman Sachs and Blackstone expanded operations there. It's not a lifestyle trend, it's math, done by people whose job is doing math. Here's where this video splits from every other move to Florida for the tax savings video on this platform. For years, that migration made obvious sense. Florida was a tax break and the cheaper state to live in. That's no longer automatically true. As of the most recent Bureau of Economic Analysis regional price data, the Miami metro area's overall cost of living has actually surpassed greater New York City's for the first time on record. The reason isn't subtle. Home prices in the Miami area have nearly doubled over the past several years, and Florida has a cost New York simply doesn't: hurricane risk. Annual homeowners insurance in Florida now runs $5,800 to $8,300 a year in high-risk areas, compared to roughly $1,700 to $1,900 in New York. Add hurricane deductibles that can hit $30,000 after a major storm, and the no state tax headline stops telling the whole story. So the real question isn't, does Florida save you money? It's, how much capital do you actually need once you run both the tax side and the cost of living side together, honestly? Using cost of living benchmarks modeled on the MIT Living Wage Framework and recent metro-level budget data, here's what an annual budget looks like at three lifestyle tiers. Florida versus New York City. Modest basic Florida, roughly $48,000 a year. New York City, roughly $65,000 a year. Comfortable, enough for a solid apartment, savings, and breathing room based on standard 50-30-20 budgeting for a single person. Florida, roughly $100,000 a year. New York City, roughly $184,000 a year. Luxury high-end Florida, roughly $160,000 a year. New York City, roughly $280,000 a year. Notice the gap at the comfortable tier specifically. New York City doesn't just ask for a little more, it asks for almost double. That's the number the tax savings headline conveniently leaves out. Now the part that actually matters. How much do you need invested, generating income purely from dividends to fund each of those lifestyles? Using a conservative, sustainable blended dividend yield of 3.5% to 4%, here's the capital required. Modest lifestyle. Florida, $48K per year, roughly $1.28 million invested. New York City, $65K per year, roughly $1.73 million invested. Comfortable lifestyle. Florida, $100K per year, roughly $2.67 million invested. New York City, $184K per year, roughly $4.92 million invested. Luxury lifestyle. Florida, $160K per year, roughly $4.27 million invested. New York City, $280K per year, roughly $7.47 million invested. At the comfortable tier, New York City demands more than $2 million in additional capital just to fund an equivalent life. That's not a tax bracket difference anymore. That's an entirely separate portfolio you'd have to build from nothing. A number like $2.67 million looks abstract until you break it into a monthly habit. Investing $1,000 a month at a realistic 9% average total return crosses $1 million in just under 26 years. Push that to $1,500 a month and you'd cross $1 million in roughly 22 years, and you'd reach the Florida comfortable target of $2.67 million in a little over 33 years of consistent investing. That's not a shortcut, that's a career-length habit. Starting your late 20s and you're funding this lifestyle by your early 60s, right on a normal retirement timeline, without needing a business, a windfall, or a lucky trade. The account you use compounds the state tax advantage even further. A Roth IRA lets your contributions grow completely tax-free. No dividend tax, no capital gains tax, ever on qualified withdrawals. Combine a Roth IRA with Florida residency, and you've effectively removed federal tax from part of your portfolio and removed state tax from all of it. The contribution limits mean a Roth alone won't get you to a multi-million-dollar portfolio, so most of this capital will sit in a taxable brokerage account. And that's exactly where the Florida versus New York gap does its heaviest lifting, because taxable dividends are precisely what New York's top bracket targets, and precisely what Florida's Constitution refuses to touch. Here's where most move to Florida content stops. This is where the real gap opens up. Unlock 1. Qualified dividends. Most US stocks and ETFs held longer than 60 days are qualified, which means the federal government taxes them at capital gains rates, 0%, 15%, or 20%, instead of your regular income tax rate. That's a federal advantage available to residents of every state, but stack it on top of Florida's 0% state rate specifically, and a middle-income Florida investor can realistically owe $0 in both federal and state tax on a meaningful slice of dividend income. In New York, that same qualified rate still gets layered underneath the state's own tax on top. The federal break helps, but it never gets you to zero. Unlock 2. The tax nobody plans for, because it doesn't arrive until you're gone. New York charges a state estate tax on estates worth more than $7.16 million, with rates reaching 16%. Florida charges none. The state constitution prohibits it entirely, with no exception. Go back to the $2.7 million comfortable lifestyle portfolio from earlier. On its own, that's under New York's threshold, but add a paid-off home, a retirement account, and a life insurance policy, completely ordinary for someone who spent 30 years building this. And a Florida investor's family can cross that $7.16 million line without ever feeling wealthy. In Florida, every dollar above that line still passes to your heirs intact. In New York, it doesn't. This is the part every surface-level tax comparison video misses, because it isn't about what you keep at 45, it's about what your family keeps after you're not the one collecting the dividend anymore. Somewhere in this research, you'll find something promising a 10, 12, even 15% yield, and it'll look like a way to shrink that multi-million-dollar number fast. It's usually a warning sign, not an opportunity. A yield that high often means the stock price has already collapsed, which inflates the percentage. Or the company's paying out more than it earns, which means the cut is coming. When it comes, you lose the income and the principal in the same move. The portfolios that actually reach these numbers are built on boring, reliable payers. Dividend aristocrats with 25+ years of consecutive increases. Not exciting, durable. That's the trait that matters over a 25 to 30-year timeline. You don't need to handpick individual companies to execute any of this. SCHD, the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, screens for companies with a sustained history of dividend growth and strong free cash flow, filtering out most yield traps before they reach your portfolio. Pair it with VOO or VYM, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF for broader growth, or the Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF for more income tilt. Blend the two, and you get rising dividend income plus long-term market growth without needing to track 40 individual tickers. Florida's tax advantage is real. 0% will always beat 10.9%, and that's not changing anytime soon. But the number that made you click on this video was never the whole story. It's the cost of living that erodes the savings while you're alive, and it's a $7.16 million line in the sand that decides what's left when you're not. Run all of it together, honestly. The income tax, the true cost of living, and the number nobody wants to think about. Not just the headline that made you want to move in the first place. If this gave you a clearer number than the Move to Florida Save on Taxes videos usually do, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Which state should get the same honest breakdown next?